I walked into that boardroom thinking it was just another Tuesday. I was wrong. The moment I sat down, I felt it, the weight of eyes on me. Cold. Judging. Waiting. David Harrington, CEO of Harrington Industries, sat at the head of the table like a king on a throne. His suit was sharp. His smile was sharper. And when he looked at me, I knew something was about to break. "Emma," he said, voice dripping with mockery. "So glad you could finally join us." I was 3 minutes early. But no one said anything. I pulled out my folder, hands steady even though my heart was hammering. I'd worked on this proposal for weeks. Late nights. Skipped meals. Endless revisions. This was supposed to be my moment. "Let's get started," I said, keeping my voice professional. David leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Oh, by all means. Enlighten us." The room was silent. I opened my mouth to begin. "Actually," David interrupted, waving a hand lazily, "before you waste everyone's time, let me ask you something." I stopped. He smiled. "Do you even understand what you're proposing here? Or did you just copy-paste some buzzwords from the internet?" A few people around the table shifted uncomfortably. I swallowed. "I understand it completely. I've been working closely with the development team for months," he repeated, voice mocking. "And yet, somehow, you still managed to produce the most useless, brain-dead proposal I've ever seen." The air left the room. I blinked, stunned. "Excuse me?" David stood up slowly, walking around the table like a predator circling prey. "You heard me. This proposal is garbage. It's naive. It's poorly thought out. And frankly, Emma, it makes me question whether you have any business being in this room at all." My face burned. Someone coughed awkwardly. "David," one of the board members said quietly, maybe we should what?" David snapped. "Pretend she's competent? Pretend this isn't a complete waste of time?" He stopped right behind my chair. I could feel his presence, heavy and suffocating. "Let me be clear," he said, voice low and venomous. "You are not smart enough for this company. You are not skilled enough. And you are certainly not worth the salary we're paying you." My hands clenched into fists under the table. "You're dumb, Emma," he continued, louder now. "And worse than that, you're useless." The words echoed in the silence. No one defended me. No one spoke. I sat there, humiliated, broken, and alone. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just stood up, closed my folder, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind me. And I never looked back. If you're enjoying this so far, please subscribe to the channel and watch till the end. I promise you, this story is just getting started. I didn't go back to my desk. I didn't grab my things. I walked straight out of that building, past the glass doors, past the security guard who nodded at me like nothing had happened, past the fountain in the courtyard where I used to eat lunch and dream about moving up in the company. I walked until my legs ached. Until the city noise faded into white static. Until I found myself sitting on a bench in a park I didn't recognize, staring at my hands like they belonged to someone else. I'd given Harrington Industries 3 years of my life. 3 years of late nights and early mornings. 3 years of missed birthdays, canceled plans, and relationships I let die because I was too busy chasing a dream that wasn't even mine. And for what? To be called dumb. Useless. In front of a room full of people who didn't even have the decency to speak up. I pulled out my phone. 12 missed calls from HR. 4 texts from my manager asking where I went. 1 email from David's assistant, asking me to please return to the office for a discussion. I deleted them all. Then I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in months. Marcus Hale. Former colleague. Current VP of Strategy at Meridian Corporation, Harrington's biggest rival. My thumb hovered over his name for a long time. Then I pressed call. He answered on the second ring. Emma? His voice was surprised, but warm. Haven't heard from you in forever. What's up? I took a breath. Marcus, I said quietly. I need to talk to you about something. Sure. What's going on? I paused, the weight of what I was about to do settling over me like a heavy coat. I want to work for you. Silence. Then, what? I'm leaving Harrington Industries, I said, my voice stronger now. And I want to work for Meridian. Another pause. Emma, are you serious? Completely. I could hear him shifting, probably sitting up straighter wherever he was. What happened? I'll explain everything, I said. But not over the phone. Can we meet? Of course. Tonight? Tonight. 7 o'clock. The Riverside Cafe. I'll be there. I hung up. And for the first time since I'd walked out of that boardroom, I smiled. Not a happy smile. A dangerous one. The cafe was dimly lit, tucked into a quiet corner of the city where business deals were made over wine and whispered promises. Marcus was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth near the back. He stood when he saw me, concern written all over his face. Emma, he said, pulling me into a quick hug. You look tired. I am, I admitted, sliding into the seat across from him. He sat down, studying me carefully. What happened? I told him everything. The meeting. The humiliation. The words that still echoed in my head like a curse. Dumb. Useless. Marcus's jaw tightened as I spoke. When I finished, he leaned back, shaking his head slowly. That's... God, Emma, I'm sorry. That's unacceptable. It is, I agreed. But I'm done being a victim. He raised an eyebrow. Meaning? I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Meaning I know things about Harrington Industries that David doesn't think I know. I've been in the background for 3 years. I've seen the deals, the contracts, the partnerships. I've heard the conversations people thought I wasn't listening to. Marcus's eyes sharpened. And, he prompted. And, I said slowly, I want to give that information to you. He blinked. You want to, what? I want to give you everything I know, I said. Legally. Ethically. But strategically. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing. Emma, he said carefully, that's a big move. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. He studied me, searching my face for doubt. He didn't find any. All right, he said finally. Let's talk. We talked for hours. I told him about Harrington's upcoming merger with a tech firm in Silicon Valley, a deal that was supposed to be confidential but wasn't airtight. I told him about the patent disputes they were quietly settling out of court, hoping no one would notice. I told him about the internal reports showing declining morale, high turnover, and a company culture so toxic it was only a matter of time before it imploded. And I told him about the vulnerabilities. The weak points. The places where Meridian could strike and win. Marcus listened, taking notes on his phone, asking clarifying questions, his expression growing more intense with every detail. When I finally finished, he set his phone down and looked at me with something that might have been awe. You're a goldmine, he said quietly. I shook my head. I'm just someone who paid attention. Most people don't, he said. That's what makes this valuable. He paused, then leaned forward. If you do this, Emma, if you really do this, there's no going back. You understand that, right? I understand. Harrington will come after you. Not physically, but legally. Professionally. They'll try to destroy your reputation. Let them try. Marcus smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. All right then, he said. Welcome to Meridian. We shook hands. And in that moment, I knew I'd just declared war. The first week at Meridian was a blur. I was given an office on the executive floor, glass walls, city views, a desk that didn't wobble. Marcus introduced me to the leadership team as its strategic consultant, which was corporate speak for the person who's going to help us crush Harrington Industries. They welcomed me with handshakes and knowing smiles. Everyone knew why I was there. And no one pretended otherwise. On my third day, Marcus called me into his office. We've got a situation, he said, gesturing for me to sit. I sat. Harrington just announced they're launching a new product line next quarter, he continued. It's all over the news. Big press conference. David's calling it the future of the industry. I nodded. I know. I helped draft the initial research proposal for it 2 years ago. Marcus's eyes lit up. You did? Yeah. Before they shelved it and brought it back under a different name. Do you know the product specs? Every single one. Marcus grinned. Then we're going to beat them to market. And that's exactly what we did. Over the next 3 weeks, I worked with Meridian's R&D team to develop a competing product, one that was better, faster, and cheaper than anything Harrington was planning. We filed the patents. We locked in the suppliers. We scheduled the launch for 2 weeks before Harrington's big reveal. It was aggressive. It was ruthless. It was perfect. The day of our launch, I stood backstage at the press event, watching Marcus give the keynote speech to a room full of journalists, investors, and industry leaders. Today, Marcus said, his voice confident and clear, Meridian is proud to introduce the next generation of innovation. The screen behind him lit up with product images, technical specs, and glowing testimonials from beta testers. The crowd erupted in applause. And I knew, in that moment, that David Harrington was watching. I knew he was sitting in his office, staring at the live stream, realizing that someone had just beaten him at his own game. And I knew he had no idea it was me. Not yet. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Impressive launch. Didn't know Meridian had it in them. I frowned. Then another text came through. By the way, Emma. I know you're behind this. My blood ran cold. I looked up, scanning the crowd, but saw no one I recognized. Another buzz. We need to talk. David. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Then I typed back a single word. No. And I turned off my phone. The calls started the next day. David didn't text again, he called. Over and over and over. I didn't answer. Not the first time. Not the 10th. Not even when he started leaving voicemails, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. Emma, pick up the phone. We need to discuss this situation. You're making a mistake. Call me back. I deleted every single one. But the emails were harder to ignore. They came from his personal address, not the company one, which meant he didn't want HR involved. Which meant he knew he'd crossed a line. The first email was short. Emma, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Let's meet and clear the air. I didn't respond. The second was longer. I've been told you're working with Meridian. I don't know what they've promised you, but I can assure you, this path will not end well for you. I'm willing to discuss your return to Harrington under better terms. I laughed out loud when I read that one. Better terms. As if I'd ever go back. The third email was different. The tone shifted. Emma, I underestimated you. I see that now. But what you're doing is dangerous, for both of us. You think you're winning, but you're playing a game you don't fully understand. Call me. I closed the laptop. He was scared. Good. Meanwhile, Meridian was thriving. Our product launch had been a massive success. Pre-orders were through the roof. Investors were calling. The stock price jumped 12% in a single day. And Harrington Industries? Their launch, scheduled for 2 weeks after ours, was now being called redundant by industry analysts. Their stock dropped. Shareholders started asking questions. And David was scrambling. Marcus called me into his office one afternoon, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "You're not going to believe this," he said, pulling up an article on his computer. The headline read, "Harrington Industries faces internal turmoil as leadership questions CEO's strategy." I leaned closer, reading. The article cited anonymous sources within Harrington, claiming that David had ignored warnings from his own team, pushed forward with a flawed product, and alienated key employees. One quote stood out: "Harrington's CEO has a history of dismissing valuable team members. It's no surprise that talent is leaving and taking their insights with them." I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. "They're turning on him," Marcus said. "His own board." "Good," I said quietly. Marcus looked at me, curious. "Do you feel bad? Even a little?" I thought about it. About the humiliation. The words. The way no one had defended me. "No," I said. "I don't." But that wasn't entirely true. Late at night, when the office was empty and the city lights blurred together outside my window, I did feel something. Not guilt. Not regret. But a deep, aching anger that hadn't fully gone away. Because as much as I was winning, as much as David was losing, it still didn't erase what he'd done. It didn't take back the words. It didn't undo the humiliation. And it didn't answer the question that haunted me in the quiet moments: why did he do it? Why had he chosen that moment, that meeting, to destroy me in front of everyone? Was it ego? Insecurity? Or something darker? I didn't know. But I was going to find out. I started digging. Not into Harrington's business strategy, I already knew that inside and out. No, I started digging into David himself. I reached out to old contacts. Former employees. People who'd left Harrington under less than ideal circumstances. And what I found was a pattern. David had done this before. Not just to me. To others. A project manager named Sarah who'd been publicly berated during a budget meeting, then quietly forced out. A senior analyst named James who'd proposed an idea David later claimed as his own, and when James protested, he was labeled difficult and not a team player. A marketing director named Aisha who'd questioned a campaign strategy and was mocked in front of clients. The stories were all the same. David built his empire by tearing people down. And he got away with it because no one fought back. Until now. I compiled everything into a single document. Dates. Names. Testimonials. A pattern of behavior that painted a very clear picture: David Harrington was not just a bad boss. He was a bully. And bullies don't stop until someone makes them. I sent the document to Marcus. "What do you want to do with this?" he asked when we met the next day. "I want to leak it," I said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That's bold." "It's the truth." "It's also risky," he said carefully. "If this gets traced back to you, or to Meridian, it could blow back on us." "It won't," I said. "I'll make sure of it." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "But be smart about it." I was. I sent the document anonymously to 3 journalists I knew had covered Harrington in the past. No return address. No identifying information. Just the facts. And a subject line: The Real Cost of Leadership at Harrington Industries. 2 days later, the first article dropped. The headline, Toxic Leadership, Former Employees Speak Out Against Harrington CEO. It spread like wildfire. Major outlets picked it up. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended. And David's world began to crumble. The board called an emergency meeting. Shareholders demanded answers. Employees, current ones, started speaking up, emboldened by the others who'd come forward. And David? He tried to do damage control. He released a statement calling the allegations baseless and defamatory. He claimed he was the victim of a smear campaign. He threatened legal action. But no one believed him. Because the stories were too consistent. The pattern was too clear. And the damage was too deep. Within a week, the board placed him on administrative leave. Corporate speak for, you're done. I watched it all unfold from my office at Meridian, a strange sense of calm settling over me. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. Not just for me. For everyone he'd hurt. And I wasn't finished yet. Marcus knocked on my door late one evening, just as I was packing up to leave. Got a minute, he asked. Sure. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I just got off the phone with a contact at Harrington, he said. The board's talking about selling. I looked up, surprised. Selling the company? Pieces of it, yeah. They're trying to salvage what they can before the whole thing collapses. My mind raced. What pieces? Marcus smiled slowly. The tech division. The one you used to work in. I felt my pulse quicken. Are they taking offers? Not publicly. But word is, they're desperate. I leaned back in my chair, thinking. How much would it cost? Marcus laughed. Emma, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious. He shook his head, still smiling. It's not just about cost. It's about leverage, timing, resources. Marcus, I interrupted. How much? He sighed, pulling out his phone and scrolling through notes. Ballpark? 80 million. I didn't flinch. Can Meridian afford it? Technically, yes. But it's a huge risk. Harrington's brand is toxic right now. Buying any part of them could drag us down too. Or, I said slowly, it could be the smartest move we ever make. Marcus looked at me, curious. Explain. Harrington's tech division is the only part of the company that's still profitable, I said. The patents alone are worth twice what they're asking. And if we buy it, we don't just get the assets, we get the talent, the infrastructure, and the market position. And the baggage, Marcus pointed out. Which we rebrand, I said. We strip away the Harrington name, integrate it into Meridian, and turn it into something better. Marcus was quiet, considering. You really want to do this, he said finally. I really do. He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. All right, he said. I'll talk to the board. 3 weeks later, the deal closed. Meridian acquired Harrington's tech division for $75 million, $5 million under asking price because the board was desperate. The announcement made headlines. Meridian acquires key assets from struggling Harrington Industries. Harrington's fall from grace complete as rival buys crown jewel. Emma Hart, the woman behind Meridian's meteoric rise. That last one surprised me. Apparently, someone had leaked my role in the acquisition. My name was everywhere. Articles. Interviews. LinkedIn messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. And through it all, my phone kept buzzing. David. Still calling. Still trying. I finally listened to one of his voicemails. His voice was different now. Tired. Defeated. Emma, he said quietly, I know you're not going to answer. I know you hate me. And I understand why. But I need you to know. I'm sorry. I was wrong. About everything. I let my ego get in the way, and I hurt you. I hurt a lot of people. And now I'm paying for it. A long pause. I don't expect forgiveness. I wanted you to know. The message ended. I stared at my phone, feeling nothing. No satisfaction. No anger. Just emptiness. Because the truth was, his apology didn't matter anymore. It was too late. The damage was done. And I had moved on. I deleted the voicemail. And I blocked his number. Months passed. Meridian thrived. The tech division we'd acquired became our most profitable sector, driving innovation and growth across the entire company. I was promoted to Chief Strategy Officer. Corner office. Executive perks. A seat at the table I'd always wanted. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But the story wasn't over yet. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years. Aisha. The marketing director from Harrington who'd been humiliated by David. She was standing in the lobby, waiting for an interview with our HR team. Emma, she said, eyes widening. Oh my God, it's really you. I smiled. Aisha. What are you doing here? I'm applying for a position, she said, a little embarrassed. Meridian's hiring, and after everything that happened at Harrington. I figured it was time for a fresh start. I nodded slowly. Come with me, I said. I brought her up to my office, bypassing HR entirely. We talked for over an hour. About Harrington. About David. About what it felt like to be torn down and have to rebuild yourself from scratch. And when we were done, I made a decision. You're hired, I said. Aisha blinked. What? You're hired, I repeated. I'll talk to HR and make it official, but as far as I'm concerned, you're part of the team. Tears welled up in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me, I said. Just promise me one thing. Anything. If you ever see someone being treated the way David treated us, you speak up. You don't let it slide. You fight back. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I promise. Over the next few months, I did the same for others. Sarah, the project manager. James, the analyst. Anyone who'd been burned by Harrington and deserved a second chance. I built a team of people who'd been underestimated, overlooked, and discarded. And together, we became unstoppable. Meridian didn't just beat Harrington. We eclipsed them. Our market share doubled. Our revenue tripled. And our company culture? It became the gold standard in the industry. People wanted to work for us. Investors wanted to fund us. And competitors? They feared us. Meanwhile, Harrington Industries continued to spiral. David was officially removed as CEO. The board brought in a crisis management team to try to salvage the company, but it was too little, too late. Within a year, Harrington filed for bankruptcy. The company that had once been an industry giant was sold off in pieces, its legacy reduced to cautionary tales in business school case studies. And David? I heard he tried to start a consulting firm. It failed within 6 months. Last I heard, he was living in a small apartment in a city I'd never heard of, working freelance gigs and trying to stay relevant. I didn't feel sorry for him. But I didn't feel triumphant either. I just felt free. Free from the anger. Free from the need for revenge. Free to build something new. 1 year after the acquisition, Meridian held its annual gala, a black tie event where we celebrated our successes and honored our team. I stood on stage, looking out at a room full of people who believed in what we were building. Marcus was there, grinning at me from the front row. Aisha, Sarah, and James were at a table together, laughing about something I couldn't hear. And for a moment, I felt a swell of pride so strong it almost knocked me over. "This past year has been incredible," I said into the microphone, my voice steady. "We've grown, we've innovated, and we've proven that success doesn't have to come at the cost of humanity." Applause filled the room. "I want to thank every single person here," I continued. "Because this isn't just my story. It's ours. And it's proof that when you treat people with respect, when you value their contributions, and when you give them a chance to shine, magic happens." More applause. I paused, then added quietly, "And to anyone out there who's ever been told they're not good enough, not smart enough, not worth it, I want you to know something." The room went silent. "They're wrong," I said. "You are enough. You are brilliant. And you are absolutely worth it." The applause was deafening. And as I stepped off the stage, I realized something. I didn't need David's apology. I didn't need his regret. Because I'd already won. Not by destroying him, but by building something better. The night of the gala, after the speeches and the champagne and the congratulations, I found myself alone on the rooftop terrace of the venue. The city stretched out below me, lights twinkling like stars. I pulled out my phone, scrolling absent-mindedly through notifications. And that's when I saw it. An email. From David. Subject line, "One last thing." I hesitated. I'd blocked his number, but apparently not his email. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The message was short. "Emma, I won't bother you again after this. I just wanted to say that I watched your speech tonight. Someone forwarded me the live stream. And I realized something. You were never the problem. I was. I was insecure, threatened, and too proud to admit that you were smarter and more capable than I ever gave you credit for. You deserved better. And I'm sorry I couldn't see that until it was too late. I hope you find everything you're looking for. You've already accomplished more than I ever did. David." I read it twice. Then I closed the email. And I deleted it. Not out of anger, but because I didn't need it anymore. His words didn't define me. His apology didn't validate me. I had already validated myself. I slipped my phone back into my purse and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, David was trying to rebuild his life. And honestly, I hoped he succeeded. Not because I forgave him, but because holding on to anger would have only hurt me. And I was done hurting. The months that followed were some of the best of my life. Meridian continued to grow, and so did I. I started mentoring young professionals, especially women who were struggling to find their voice in male-dominated industries. I gave talks at universities, sharing my story and encouraging others to stand up for themselves. And I built relationships, real, meaningful connections with people who valued me for who I was, not what I could do for them. One afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't answer. But something told me to pick up. "Hello? Emma Hart?" The voice was unfamiliar, professional, clipped. "Speaking. My name is Catherine Liu. I'm a literary agent, and I've been following your story. I'd like to discuss the possibility of you writing a book." I blinked, surprised. "A book?" "Yes. Your journey, from being humiliated in a boardroom to becoming one of the most influential strategists in the industry, is incredibly compelling. I think there's a huge audience for it." I sat down slowly, processing. I don't know. I'm not a writer." "You don't have to be," Catherine said. "We'd pair you with a ghostwriter. All you'd need to do is tell your story." I thought about it. About the emails I'd received from people who said my story inspired them. About the women who'd reached out, asking for advice on how to deal with toxic bosses. About the power of sharing experiences so that others didn't feel alone. "All right," I said finally. "Let's talk." 6 months later, the book was published. Title: Rising After the Fall, How I Turned Humiliation into Power. It became a bestseller within the first week. Articles were written about it. Podcasts invited me on to discuss it. And the messages poured in, thousands of them, from people who said the book changed their lives. I never set out to become a public figure. I just wanted to survive. To rebuild. To prove that I was more than the words someone had used to tear me down. But somewhere along the way, I became something else. A voice. A symbol. A reminder that you can fall and still rise. That you can be broken and still rebuild. That you can be told you're nothing and still become everything. 2 years after I left Harrington Industries, I received an invitation. It was from a business conference, one of the biggest in the industry. They wanted me to give the keynote speech. I accepted. The day of the conference, I stood backstage, waiting for my cue. My heart was pounding, but not from nerves. From excitement. Because I was about to step onto a stage in front of thousands of people and tell them exactly what I'd learned. That power doesn't come from tearing others down. It comes from building them up. That success doesn't come from fear and control. It comes from trust and respect. And that the people who try to break you? They're only revealing their own weakness. The host introduced me, and I walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. I took a breath. And I began. 2 years ago, I was sitting in a boardroom, being told I was dumb and useless by a man who thought his title made him untouchable. The room went silent. I walked out of that room broken. Humiliated. Convinced that maybe he was right. I paused, letting the weight of those words settle. But here's the thing about being broken, I continued, my voice stronger now. It gives you a choice. You can stay on the ground, or you can pick up the pieces and build something new. I looked out at the audience, faces rapt, hanging on every word. I chose to build, I said. And in doing so, I didn't just rebuild myself. I built a career. A team. A company. And a life that's more fulfilling than I ever imagined. The applause started again, but I held up a hand. But I didn't do it alone, I said. I did it with the help of people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. People who saw my value even when I couldn't. And people who reminded me that my worth was never defined by someone else's opinion. I smiled. So if you're in a situation where someone is trying to tear you down, I want you to remember this: their words say more about them than they ever will about you. The applause was deafening. And as I walked off that stage, I realized something. I wasn't the same person who'd walked out of that boardroom 2 years ago. I was stronger. Wiser. And finally, truly free. That night, as I sat in my hotel room, I got a text from Marcus. "Congrats on the speech. You killed it." I smiled. "Thanks. Couldn't have done it without you. Please. You did this all on your own." I set my phone down, thinking about how far I'd come. And for the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely at peace. The next morning, as I was checking out of the hotel, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. "Hello? Emma." The voice was quiet, hesitant. Familiar. My stomach dropped. "David?" "Yeah. It's me." Silence. "How did you get this number?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. I have a contact at the conference. They gave it to me. I know I shouldn't have called, but I saw your speech online, and I just I had to reach out. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. David, I'm not asking for anything, he interrupted. I just wanted to tell you that I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry. I know I've said it before, but I need you to know I mean it. I stood there in the hotel lobby, people bustling around me, and I felt a strange mix of emotions. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Just exhaustion. David, I said quietly, I appreciate that you called. I do. But I've moved on. And I think you need to as well. He was quiet for a moment. I know, he said finally. I needed you to hear it one more time. That's all. I heard you, I said. And I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. I really do. But this, us talking, it's not healthy. For either of us. I understand. Goodbye, David. Goodbye, Emma. I hung up. And I meant it this time. I blocked the number immediately, then deleted the call log. Some chapters need to stay closed. Some people need to stay in the past. And some battles are only won by walking away. I took a deep breath, grabbed my suitcase, and headed for the exit. The sun was shining. The air was crisp. And I had a flight to catch. Back to Meridian. Back to my team. Back to the life I'd built from the rubble of my worst day. 3 months later, I was in a board meeting when Marcus slid a folder across the table to me. I opened it, scanning the documents inside. My eyes widened. Is this? Yep, Marcus said, grinning. Harrington Industries is officially dissolved. The last of their assets were sold off yesterday. They're done. I stared at the paperwork, feeling a strange sense of finality. Harrington Industries, the company that had once seemed so powerful, so untouchable, was gone. Erased. A footnote in business history. How do you feel? Marcus asked. I thought about it. Honestly? I said. I feel nothing. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Nothing? Nothing, I repeated. It's just a company. It doesn't matter anymore. And I meant it. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about revenge. It stopped being about proving David wrong. It became about proving myself right. About building something meaningful. About creating a legacy that wasn't defined by what I destroyed, but by what I created. That evening, I went home to my apartment, a spacious loft in the heart of the city with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that took my breath away every time I walked in. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the balcony, watching the sunset. My phone buzzed. A text from Aisha. Drinks tomorrow night? The team wants to celebrate the Harrington news. I smiled and typed back. Absolutely. I'll be there. The next night, we gathered at a rooftop bar, Aisha, Sarah, James, Marcus, and a few others from the team. We ordered appetizers, clinked glasses, and talked about everything except work. Movies. Travel. Terrible first dates. Ridiculous childhood stories. It was easy. Light. Joyful. And I realized, sitting there surrounded by people who'd become more than colleagues, who'd become friends, that this was what success actually looked like. Not the corner office or the title or the stock options. This. Connection. Laughter. Belonging. You know, Sarah said, raising her glass, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad Harrington fell apart. We all looked at her. Not because I wanted anyone to suffer, she clarified quickly. But because if it hadn't, we wouldn't be here. Together. Building something better. James nodded. She's right. Harrington collapsing was the best thing that ever happened to us. Aisha smiled. To second chances. To second chances, we echoed, clinking glasses. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Gratitude. Not for the pain. Not for the humiliation. But for the fact that I survived it. And came out stronger on the other side. Months turned into a year. Meridian continued to dominate the market. We expanded internationally, opening offices in London, Tokyo, and Singapore. We launched new products that changed the industry. And we maintained a company culture that people admired, one built on respect, collaboration, and innovation. I was busier than ever. But I was also happier. One afternoon, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. Subject line, "Thank you." Curious, I opened it. Dear MS. Hart, my name is Jennifer, and I'm a junior analyst at a tech firm in San Francisco. I recently read your book, and I wanted to reach out to tell you how much it meant to me. Last year, I was in a situation similar to yours, publicly humiliated by my boss, told I wasn't good enough, and pushed out of a company I loved. I was devastated. I didn't think I'd ever recover. But then I read your story, and it gave me hope. It reminded me that failure isn't the end, it's just the beginning of something new. I'm now working at a company that values me, and I'm happier than I've ever been. So thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being honest about the pain and the struggle. And thank you for showing me that it's possible to rise after the fall. With gratitude, Jennifer. I read the email 3 times, tears blurring my vision. Then I hit reply. Dear Jennifer, thank you for reaching out. Your message means more to me than you know. I'm so proud of you for finding the courage to rebuild and for choosing to bet on yourself. That takes incredible strength. Keep going. Keep building. And never let anyone convince you that you're not enough. Because you are. Always. Warmly, Emma. I sent it, then sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the weight of what I've created. Not just a career. Not just a company. But a ripple effect. A movement. A reminder that pain doesn't have to be the end of the story. That night, I went to dinner with Marcus. We'd become close over the past 2 years, not romantically, but as true friends and partners in building something meaningful. You seem different lately, he said, studying me over his wine glass. Different how? Lighter, he said. Like you're finally letting go of the weight you've been carrying. I smiled. I think I am. Good, he said. You deserve it. We talked for hours, about the company, about life, about the future. And at one point, Marcus leaned back and said, You know, when you first came to me with all that information about Harrington, I thought you were just angry. Looking for revenge. I raised an eyebrow. And now? Now I realize you weren't looking for revenge, he said. You were looking for justice. And there's a difference. I nodded slowly. Revenge is about destruction, I said. Justice is about balance. About making things right. Exactly, Marcus said. And you did that. Not just for yourself, but for everyone David hurt. I took a sip of wine, thinking. I don't know if I made things right, I said honestly. But I hope I made them better. Marcus smiled. You did. 2 years turned into 3. Meridian was now one of the top 5 companies in our industry. We'd been featured in Fortune, Forbes, and the Wall Street Journal. I'd been named one of the most influential women in business by multiple publications. And my book had been translated into 12 languages. But the thing I was most proud of? The culture we'd built. Meridian had a 97% employee satisfaction rate. Turnover was almost non-existent. And when we posted job openings, we received thousands of applications from people who wanted to be part of something meaningful. We'd proven that you didn't have to be ruthless to be successful. That you didn't have to sacrifice humanity for profit. That kindness and ambition could coexist. And people were paying attention. Other companies started reaching out, asking for advice on how to improve their cultures. Universities invited me to speak about leadership and ethics. And slowly, quietly, the industry began to shift. Not because of me alone. But because enough people decided that the old way, the David Harrington way, wasn't working anymore. One evening, I was sitting in my office, working late, when I got a notification on my phone. A news alert. Former Harrington CEO David Harrington announces new venture. My heart skipped a beat. I clicked on the article. David had launched a nonprofit. An organization focused on helping executives improve their leadership skills and build healthier company cultures. The article included a quote from him: "I spent years building a company the wrong way, through fear, control, and ego. And I lost everything because of it. Now, I want to help others avoid the mistakes I made." True leadership isn't about power. It's about service. I stared at the screen, processing. Part of me was skeptical. Was this genuine? Or just another attempt to rebuild his reputation? But another part of me, the part that had spent 3 years healing and growing, wanted to believe that people could change. That even someone like David could learn from his mistakes. I didn't reach out to him. I didn't send a congratulatory message or offer support. But I also didn't dismiss what he was doing. Because if his experience could help even one person become a better leader, then maybe something good had come from all the pain. The following month, I was invited to speak at a leadership summit in New York. It was a massive event, thousands of attendees, dozens of speakers, and panels covering everything from innovation to ethics. I arrived the day before my speech, checked into my hotel, and decided to explore the venue. As I was walking through the exhibition hall, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Emma?" I froze. I turned slowly. And there he was. David Harrington. He looked different. Older. Thinner. Tired. But there was something else in his eyes. Humility. "David," I said, my voice neutral. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said quickly. I'm not trying to ambush you or anything. I'm speaking tomorrow on a panel about leadership failures." I nodded slowly. "I saw the article about your nonprofit." He looked surprised. "You did?" "Yeah." An awkward silence stretched between us. "Look," David said finally, "I know I've apologized before. And I know words don't mean much at this point. But I want you to know that I've spent the last 3 years trying to understand what I did wrong. Not just to you, but to everyone." I studied him carefully. "And what did you learn?" I asked. He took a breath. "That I was a coward," he said. "I was insecure, and instead of dealing with that, I took it out on people who didn't deserve it. People who were talented, capable, and threatening to my ego." I didn't respond. "You were right to leave," he continued. "You were right to fight back. And you were right to build something better. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what I did. And I'm trying to be better." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "I hope you succeed." He blinked, surprised. "You do?" "I do," I said honestly. "Not for me. But for the people you're trying to help. If your experience can make even one workplace healthier, then maybe it wasn't all for nothing." David's eyes glistened. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means more than you know." I nodded. "Goodbye, David." "Goodbye, Emma." And I walked away. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction. Just with peace. The next day, I delivered my keynote speech. I talked about resilience. About the importance of speaking up. About the power of building instead of destroying. And about the fact that our worst moments don't define us, our response to them does. The audience gave me a standing ovation. And as I walked off the stage, I realized something. I wasn't defined by what David did to me anymore. I was defined by what I built after. And that made all the difference. For years after I left Harrington Industries, I stood in the lobby of Meridian's new headquarters, a gleaming glass building in the heart of the city, with our logo etched into the marble floor. Marcus walked up beside me, hands in his pockets. "Pretty incredible, isn't it?" he said. "Yeah," I said. "It really is." "You know," he said, "when you first came to me 4 years ago with all that intel on Harrington, I thought we'd have a good year. Maybe 2. I never imagined this." I smiled. "Neither did I." "But you built it," he said. "This company, this culture, it's because of you." I shook my head. "It's because of all of us." Marcus laughed. "Always so humble." "Not humble," I corrected. "Just honest. I couldn't have done this alone. And I didn't want to." He nodded, then glanced at his watch. "You ready for the board meeting?" "Ready." We walked into the conference room, where the executive team was already gathered. Aisha was presenting the latest marketing campaign. Sarah was reviewing our quarterly financials. James was discussing new product development. And I sat at the head of the table, listening, guiding, supporting. This was my team. My family. My legacy. After the meeting, I returned to my office and found an envelope on my desk. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in elegant script. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a single card. The front read, "Congratulations." I opened it. The message inside was short. "Emma, I heard about Meridian's success, and I wanted to reach out one last time, not to ask for anything, but to say that I'm genuinely proud of what you've built. You proved that strength doesn't come from tearing others down. It comes from lifting them up. I hope you're happy. You've earned it. David." I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not to keep forever. Not to forget. Just to acknowledge that even the darkest chapters can eventually close. That evening, I went home and sat on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker to life. I thought about the woman I'd been 4 years ago. Broken. Humiliated. Convinced she wasn't enough. And I thought about the woman I was now. Strong. Confident. Certain of her worth. The journey between those 2 versions of myself had been brutal. But it had also been necessary. Because I wouldn't be who I am today if I hadn't been torn down first. Sometimes, you have to break before you can rebuild. Sometimes, you have to lose everything before you can find yourself. And sometimes, the people who hurt you end up teaching you the most important lesson of all, that you are stronger than you think. That you are capable of more than you imagine. And that you are absolutely, unequivocally enough. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Drinks this weekend?" I smiled and typed back. "Absolutely." Because this life I'd built, wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving myself right. About choosing to rise instead of staying down. About building something beautiful from the ashes of my worst day. And that, more than anything, was the real victory. 5 years after the boardroom incident, I found myself standing in front of a mirror, adjusting my dress. Tonight was Meridian's annual gala, the biggest one yet. We were celebrating our 5th anniversary as the top company in our industry, and the venue was packed with employees, investors, partners, and press. I took a deep breath, looking at my reflection. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Not because I looked different. But because I felt different. Confident. Grounded. Free. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," I called. Marcus poked his head in. "You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be." He stepped inside, looking sharp in his tuxedo. "You look amazing, by the way." "Thanks," I said, smiling. "You clean up pretty well yourself." He laughed. "Come on. Everyone's waiting." We walked to the ballroom together, and the moment I stepped inside, I was hit with a wave of energy. Music. Laughter. Conversation. Hundreds of people celebrating something we'd all built together. I made my way through the crowd, shaking hands, hugging colleagues, thanking partners. And everywhere I went, people smiled. Not the fake corporate smiles I'd grown used to at Harrington. Real smiles. Genuine warmth. This was what success was supposed to feel like. Halfway through the night, Marcus clinked his glass, calling for attention. The room quieted. "Good evening, everyone," he said, his voice booming through the microphone. "Thank you all for being here tonight. 5 years ago, Meridian was a good company. But it wasn't a great one. And then something changed." He looked directly at me. "Emma Hart joined our team. And she didn't just bring strategy and insight, she brought vision. She reminded us that business isn't just about profit. It's about people. And because of her leadership, we've built something truly special." The room erupted in applause. Marcus gestured for me to join him on stage. I hesitated, then made my way up, my heart pounding. He handed me the microphone. I looked out at the crowd, at the faces of people who believed in me, fought alongside me, and helped me build something extraordinary. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. 5 years ago, I walked into Marcus's office with nothing but a battered sense of self-worth and a desperate need to prove I wasn't what someone had told me I was. The room was silent. "And Marcus took a chance on me," I continued. "Not because I had all the answers. But because he believed I could find them. And that belief, that trust, changed everything." I paused, emotion tightening my throat. "This company isn't mine," I said. "It's ours. Every single person in this room has contributed to what we've built. And I'm so incredibly proud to be part of this team." The applause was thunderous. I handed the microphone back to Marcus and stepped off the stage, my heart full. The rest of the night was a blur of champagne toasts, heartfelt conversations, and laughter that echoed through the ballroom. And as I stood on the balcony later that evening, looking out at the city, I felt a deep sense of contentment. This was my life now. Not defined by what someone took from me, but by what I built in its place. The following week, I received an unexpected email. It was from a journalist at a major business publication. Subject line, "Feature request, the woman who redefined leadership." I opened it. "Dear Ms. Hart, we're writing a feature on leaders who've transformed their industries, not through aggression or ruthlessness, but through empathy and innovation. Your name came up repeatedly in our research, and we'd love to include you in the piece. Would you be interested in an interview? Best regards, Michael Torres, Senior Editor." I stared at the email for a long moment. Then I hit reply. "Michael, I'd be honored. Let's set up a time. Best, Emma." The interview took place 2 weeks later in my office. Michael was a sharp, thoughtful journalist who asked questions that made me think deeply about my journey. "What do you think was the turning point for you?" he asked at one point. "The moment when you decided to fight back?" I thought about it. "Honestly?" I said. "It wasn't a single moment. It was a choice I made every day. To not let what happened define me. To not let anger consume me. To channel everything I was feeling into building something better." He nodded, scribbling notes. "And do you have any regrets?" I paused. "No," I said finally. Not about how I handled things. I'm sure there are things I could have done differently, but I don't regret the path I chose. What about David Harrington? Michael asked carefully. Do you ever think about him? I smiled slightly. Sometimes, I admitted. But not in the way you might think. I don't think about him with anger or bitterness. I think about him as a reminder. A reminder of what happens when ego and insecurity drive your decisions. And a reminder of why it's so important to build something better. Michael looked impressed. That's incredibly mature. I shrugged. It took time. But holding on to anger was only hurting me. Letting go was the most powerful thing I ever did. The article came out a month later. The headline read, Emma Hart, the leader who rose from humiliation to build an empire of empathy. It was a beautiful piece, thoughtful, well-researched, and deeply personal. And it sparked a new wave of attention. Interview requests poured in. Speaking invitations multiplied. And my inbox filled with messages from people who said the article inspired them. One message, in particular, stood out. It was from a woman named Lisa, a mid-level manager at a tech company. Dear Emma, I just read your article and I cried. Not because I felt sorry for you, but because I saw myself in your story. I've been dealing with a toxic boss for 2 years, and I've felt so powerless. But reading about what you did, how you chose to fight back by building something better, it gave me hope. I've decided to leave my company and start my own consulting firm. It's terrifying, but I know it's the right choice. Thank you for showing me that it's possible. With gratitude, Lisa. I read the email 3 times, my chest tight with emotion. Then I replied. Dear Lisa, I'm so proud of you. Starting your own firm takes incredible courage, and I have no doubt you're going to do amazing things. Remember, you are not powerless. You never were. You just needed to remember your own strength. If you ever need advice or support, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm cheering for you. Warmly, Emma. I hit send, then sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the ripple effect of sharing my story. This was bigger than me now. It was a movement. A shift in how people thought about leadership, success, and power. And I was honored to be part of it. 6 years after leaving Harrington Industries, I was invited to give a TED Talk. The topic, Rising After the Fall, How to Turn Your Worst Moment into Your Greatest Strength. I stood backstage, heart pounding, as the host introduced me. Please welcome to the stage Emma Hart. The applause was overwhelming. I walked out, took my place at the red, and looked out at the audience. Thousands of faces staring back at me. I took a breath. 6 years ago, I was told I was dumb. Useless. Not worth the salary I was being paid. And for a moment, just a moment, I believed it. The audience was silent. But then I made a choice, I continued. I chose to prove that person wrong. Not by destroying them, but by building something better. And in doing so, I learned the most important lesson of my life. I paused. That our worst moments don't define us. Our response to them does. I spent the next 15 minutes sharing my story, the humiliation, the pain, the decision to fight back, and the life I'd built in the aftermath. I talked about the importance of resilience, the power of community, and the fact that strength isn't about dominance, it's about endurance. And when I finished, the applause was deafening. People stood. They cheered. And I walked off that stage knowing I'd just touched thousands of lives. The TED Talk went viral. Within a week, it had been viewed over 10 million times. News outlets picked it up. Social media exploded with people sharing their own stories of overcoming humiliation and rising from failure. And my inbox flooded with messages from people all over the world. Messages like, your talk saved my career. You gave me the courage to leave a toxic job. I showed your talk to my daughter, and it changed the way she sees herself. I read every single one. And I cried more times than I could count. Because this impact, was the real victory. Not the money. Not the title. Not the revenge. But the fact that my pain had purpose. That my struggle had meaning. That my story could help others find their own strength. 7 years after the boardroom incident, I sat across from a reporter doing a follow-up piece on my journey. "So," she said, "if you could go back and change what happened that day in the boardroom, would you?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. "No," I said finally. She looked surprised. "No?" "No," I repeated. Because if that day hadn't happened, I wouldn't be who I am now. I wouldn't have built Meridian into what it is. I wouldn't have met the incredible people on my team. And I wouldn't have learned the most important lesson of my life. Which is, I smiled, that I am enough. Exactly as I am. And no one, no matter how powerful, how successful, or how intimidating, can take that away from me. The reporter smiled back. "That's beautiful." "It's true," I said simply. The article came out the following month, and it was titled "Emma Hart, the Woman Who Turned Humiliation into a Movement." It was the perfect bookend to my story. Not because my story was over, but because it had transformed into something bigger than me. 8 years after I left Harrington Industries, I received an invitation to speak at a leadership conference in London. I almost declined. I'd been traveling constantly, and I was exhausted. But something about the invitation caught my attention. The keynote speaker was David Harrington. I stared at the email, processing. David was speaking at the same conference. On the same stage. On the same day. My first instinct was to decline immediately. But then I thought about it. 8 years had passed. I'd built an empire. He'd lost his. And both of us had spent the years since trying to become better versions of ourselves. Maybe it was time to close the loop. I accepted the invitation. The conference was held at a beautiful venue in central London, a historic building with ornate architecture and sprawling gardens. I arrived the day before my speech and spent the afternoon walking through the city, clearing my head. The next morning, I arrived at the venue early. I was scheduled to speak at 2 p.m. David was speaking at 11 a.m. I decided to watch. I slipped into the back of the auditorium just as he was being introduced. He walked onto the stage, and I was struck by how different he looked. Not just older, but humbled. He stood at the podium, looked out at the audience, and began. 8 years ago, he said, I destroyed my career. I destroyed my company. And I destroyed relationships with people who deserved better. And I did it all because I was too arrogant, too insecure, and too afraid to admit that I didn't have all the answers. The audience was silent. I spent years blaming everyone but myself, he continued. But the truth is, I was the problem. And it took losing everything for me to finally see that. He paused, emotion flickering across his face. The person I hurt the most, the person I owe the biggest apology to, is someone I publicly humiliated in a boardroom. I told her she was dumb. Useless. Not worth her salary. And I said it in front of a room full of people who were too scared to defend her. My breath caught. Her name is Emma Hart, he said. And she went on to build one of the most successful companies in our industry. Not by tearing people down, but by lifting them up. She proved that real leadership isn't about power or control. It's about service and respect. He looked directly at the back of the room. At me. Emma, he said, his voice cracking slightly, if you're listening to this, I want you to know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. And I'm grateful. Because you taught me the most important lesson of my life. That humility isn't weakness. It's strength. The audience erupted in applause. And I stood there, tears streaming down my face, feeling the weight of 8 years finally lift. After his speech, I waited in the hallway. David emerged a few minutes later, surrounded by people congratulating him. He saw me. And he froze. The crowd around him dispersed, sensing the moment. We stood there, 10 feet apart, just looking at each other. Then he walked over. "Emma," he said quietly. "David. I didn't know you'd be here." "I almost wasn't," I admitted. He nodded, then said, "Thank you. For listening." "Thank you," I said. "For saying it." We stood in silence for a moment. Then David said, "I meant every word. You were the best thing that ever happened to Harrington. And I was too stupid to see it." I smiled sadly. "We both learned from it." "You learned how to build something incredible," he said. "I learned how not to destroy everything I touch." I laughed softly. "That's progress." He smiled, a real, genuine smile. "I know I don't have the right to ask this," he said, "but can I buy you a coffee? Just to talk. No agenda. No expectations. Just closure." I hesitated. Then I nodded. "Okay." We sat in a quiet cafe near the venue, 2 cups of coffee between us. For the first hour, we talked about surface-level things. The conference. The city. The changes in the industry. But eventually, the conversation deepened. "I think about that day a lot," David admitted. "The boardroom. What I said to you. And I still don't fully understand why I did it." "I think you do," I said gently. "You were threatened. And instead of dealing with that, you lashed out." He nodded slowly. "Yeah. I think you're right. But here's the thing," I continued. "It doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what we both did after." "You built an empire," he said. "I built regret." "You built awareness," I corrected. "And you're using it to help others. That's not nothing." He looked at me, surprised. "You really believe that?" "I do." He smiled sadly. "You're a better person than I ever was." "I'm just a person who learned that holding on to anger only hurts me," I said. "Letting go was the most powerful thing I ever did." We talked for another hour. And when we finally stood to leave, David extended his hand. "Thank you, Emma. For everything." I shook his hand. "You're welcome." And then I walked away. Not with bitterness. Not with triumph. Just with peace. That afternoon, I delivered my own keynote speech. I talked about resilience, redemption, and the power of choosing to rise. I shared my story, all of it, including the conversation I'd just had with David. And I ended with this: 8 years ago, I was told I wasn't enough. And for a long time, I believed it. But today, I stand before you as proof that you are not defined by what someone else says about you. You are defined by what you do after. So if you're struggling, if you're hurting, if you're wondering whether you have what it takes, know this: you do. You absolutely do. And the world is waiting for you to rise. The applause was overwhelming. And as I walked off that stage, I felt a sense of completion I'd never felt before. This chapter, this long, painful, beautiful chapter, was finally closed. 9 years after I left Harrington Industries, I published my second book. Title: Building from the Ashes, A Guide to Turning Pain into Purpose. It was part memoir, part self-help, part business strategy. And it became an instant bestseller. I went on a book tour, speaking in cities around the world. And everywhere I went, people shared their stories with me. Stories of betrayal, humiliation, and failure. But also stories of resilience, growth, and triumph. And I realized that my story wasn't unique. It was universal. We've all been knocked down. We've all been told we're not enough. We've all had moments where we wondered if we could keep going. But the ones who rise, the ones who thrive, are the ones who choose to keep building. Who refuse to let their worst moment define them. Who turn pain into purpose. 10 years after the boardroom incident, Meridian celebrated its 10th anniversary. The company had grown beyond anything I could have imagined. We had offices on 6 continents. Over 10,000 employees. And a company culture that was studied in business schools around the world. At the anniversary gala, I stood on stage one last time. 10 years ago, I said, I walked out of a boardroom convinced I'd never recover. That my career was over. That I wasn't good enough. But I was wrong. Because I didn't need to recover. I needed to rebuild. And in rebuilding, I found something I didn't even know I was looking for: purpose. I paused, looking out at the crowd. This company, Meridian, isn't just a business. It's a testament to what's possible when you choose to rise. When you choose to build instead of destroy. When you choose to believe that your worst moment is just the beginning of your greatest chapter. The crowd rose to their feet, applause echoing through the grand ballroom. I took a breath, letting the moment wash over me. And I want to thank every single person who's been part of this journey, I continued. The team members who took a chance on an untested strategy. The leaders who chose empathy over ego. The employees who showed up every day believing we could build something different. This isn't my success, it's ours. As I stepped off the stage, Marcus met me at the bottom of the stairs. Hell of a speech, he said, grinning. Hell of a decade, I replied. He laughed, then grew serious. You know, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time for you to think about what comes next. I raised an eyebrow. Next? I'm already doing 10 jobs at once. I mean next, he said. You've built Meridian into what it is. You've written the books. You've given the speeches. What do you want now? For yourself? I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it. I hadn't thought about it. For 10 years, I'd been so focused on building, proving, fighting, that I'd never stopped to ask myself what I actually wanted beyond all of that. I don't know, I admitted quietly. Marcus nodded. Well, when you figure it out, let me know. Because whatever it is, I have a feeling it's going to be extraordinary. That night, I went home and sat on my balcony, Marcus's question echoing in my mind. What did I want? I'd achieved everything I'd set out to do. Built a successful company. Helped thousands of people through my books and speeches. Found closure with the person who'd hurt me most. So what was left? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old photos. Pictures from the early days at Meridian, scrappy team meetings in Marcus's office, late nights fueled by takeout and determination. Pictures from book signings, conferences, galas. Pictures of me smiling, laughing, thriving. But in all of them, I was surrounded by work. By achievement. By purpose. And I realized, I'd spent 10 years building something for others. Maybe it was time to build something for myself. The next morning, I called Marcus. I figured it out, I said. That was fast. I want to step back, I said. Not completely, I'm not leaving Meridian. But I want to transition to a less operational role. I want time. To travel. To write for pleasure, not deadlines. To just exist without constantly building something. There was a pause. Are you sure? Completely. Then let's make it happen. Over the next 6 months, we restructured the company. I transitioned from Chief Strategy Officer to Chairwoman of the Board, still involved in major decisions, but removed from day-to-day operations. Aisha was promoted to Chief Strategy Officer. Sarah became Chief Financial Officer. James took over as Head of Product Development. The team I built was ready to lead. and I was ready to let them. On my last day in the operational office, the team threw me a surprise party. Not a goodbye party, they made that very clear. A congratulations on your next chapter party. There were speeches, gifts, laughter, and more than a few tears. Sarah stood up, raising her glass. Emma, she said, her voice thick with emotion, you saved my career. You saved my confidence. You showed me that it's possible to be strong without being cruel, successful without being ruthless. And I will spend the rest of my career trying to pay that forward. Aisha nodded, standing. You didn't just give us jobs. You gave us a purpose. A community. A reminder that we're worth more than any paycheck could ever reflect. James raised his glass. You built something beautiful. And we're going to protect it with everything we have. I looked around the room at these people I'd fought alongside, built with, grown with. Thank you, I said, my voice breaking. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. For working harder than anyone should ever have to work. And for proving that kindness and ambition aren't opposites, they're partners. We raised our glasses together. And I felt, for the first time in a decade, like I could finally breathe. The first month of my retirement was strange. I woke up without a packed schedule. No back-to-back meetings. No urgent emails demanding immediate responses. Just time. I didn't know what to do with it at first. I cleaned my apartment obsessively. I reorganized my bookshelves 3 times. I binge-watched shows I'd been meaning to catch up on for years. But slowly, I began to relax into it. I started painting, something I hadn't done since college. I took long walks through the city, noticing details I'd been too busy to see before. I reconnected with old friends, having leisurely brunches and dinners that stretched for hours. And I traveled. First, to Paris, a city I'd always wanted to explore properly, not just for a 48-hour business trip. I spent 2 weeks there, wandering museums, sitting in cafes, writing in journals without any agenda. Then to Kyoto, where I stayed in a traditional ryokan and learned the art of Japanese tea ceremony. Then to the Italian countryside, where I rented a small villa and spent a month doing nothing but reading, cooking, and watching the sun set over rolling hills. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't building toward something. I was just being. And it was terrifying. And freeing. And exactly what I needed. One evening in Italy, I was sitting on the terrace with a glass of wine when my phone rang. An unknown international number. I almost didn't answer. But something told me to pick up. Hello? Emma Hart? The voice was unfamiliar, professional, warm. Speaking. My name is Dr. Anita Desai. I'm a professor at Harvard Business School, and I'm leading a new initiative focused on ethical leadership and corporate culture transformation. I sat up straighter, intrigued. I've been following your work for years, she continued. And I wondered if you'd be interested in joining us as a visiting lecturer. We're building a curriculum around real-world case studies of leaders who've transformed toxic environments into thriving ones. Your story is central to what we're trying to teach. I blinked, processing. You want me to teach at Harvard? Not full-time, she clarified. Just a semester. Maybe 2, if you enjoy it. We'd structure it around your schedule, and you'd have complete autonomy over the curriculum. I thought about it. About the messages I'd received over the years from young professionals looking for guidance. About the impact I could have on the next generation of leaders. About the opportunity to share not just what I'd done, but why it mattered. When would this start? I asked. Next fall. September. Can I think about it? Of course. Take your time. After we hung up, I sat on that terrace for hours, watching the stars emerge one by one. Teaching had never been on my radar. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the next chapter wasn't about doing what I'd always planned. Maybe it was about being open to what I'd never expected. 2 weeks later, I called Dr. Desai back. "I'm in," I said. 6 months later, I stood in front of a lecture hall at Harvard Business School, looking out at 60 eager faces. Students from around the world, all hoping to become the next generation of business leaders. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady despite my nerves. "My name is Emma Hart, and 10 years ago, I was publicly humiliated by my CEO in front of an entire boardroom. He called me dumb, useless, and told me I wasn't worth my salary." The students leaned forward, immediately hooked. "Today," I continued, "I'm going to tell you what happened next. Not because it's a fairy tale about revenge or triumph, but because it's a story about choice, about resilience, and about the kind of leader you decide to become when the world tries to break you." I spent the next hour walking them through my journey. The pain. The decision to fight back ethically. The building of Meridian. The importance of culture, empathy, and strategic thinking. And the students were riveted. When I finished, hands shot up immediately. "How did you know when to walk away versus when to fight?" one student asked. "You don't always know," I said honestly. "But you have to trust your instincts. And you have to ask yourself, is this fight worth my energy? Will it make me better, or will it just make me bitter?" Another hand. "Do you think David Harrington truly changed, or was it just damage control?" I paused, considering. "I think people can change," I said carefully. "But change requires humility, self-awareness, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. Whether David genuinely changed or not, I'll never fully know. But I chose to believe in the possibility of change because holding on to cynicism would have only hurt me." More hands. More questions. More thoughtful discussions about leadership, ethics, power, and responsibility. And I realized this was exactly where I was supposed to be. The semester flew by. My students were brilliant, challenging, and deeply engaged with the material. I assigned case studies, led simulations, and facilitated debates about ethical dilemmas in business. But the most impactful part of the course was the final project. Each student had to identify a toxic workplace dynamic either from their own experience or from research, and develop a comprehensive strategy for transforming it. The presentations were extraordinary. One student analyzed a tech startup with a brutal work culture and proposed a complete restructuring around employee wellness and psychological safety. Another examined a manufacturing company with systemic discrimination issues and designed a training program that addressed unconscious bias at every level. And one student, a quiet young woman named Priya, shared her own story of being harassed by a supervisor at her previous job. She talked about the fear, the shame, the feeling of powerlessness. And then she presented a framework for creating safe reporting systems that protect victims and hold perpetrators accountable. When she finished, the entire class stood and applauded. I walked over to her, my eyes damp. "That was extraordinary," I said. "You just changed someone's life with that presentation. Maybe many lives." Priya smiled, tears streaming down her face. "You inspired me to share it," she said. "Thank you." And in that moment, I understood the true power of teaching. It wasn't just about imparting knowledge. It was about creating space for others to find their own strength. At the end of the semester, Dr. Desai approached me. "The students are devastated you're only here for one term," she said. "Any chance we can convince you to stay?" I smiled. "Let me think about it." But I already knew my answer. I extended my contract for another year. And then another. Teaching became my new purpose. Not my only purpose, I still served on Meridian's board, wrote occasional articles, and spoke at conferences, but my primary one. I loved the students. I loved the intellectual rigor. I loved the feeling of shaping the next generation of leaders who would, hopefully, build better companies than the ones that came before. and I loved the balance it gave me. Time to teach. Time to write. Time to live. 12 years after the boardroom incident, I received an email that stopped me cold. Subject line: an unexpected development. It was from Marcus. Emma, I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how you're going to react. David Harrington reached out to me. He's written a book about his experience, about the mistakes he made, the lessons he learned, and the process of rebuilding his life. It's being published next month. He wanted me to let you know before it went public. He also wanted to make sure you knew that you're mentioned in it, respectfully and with full acknowledgement of what he did wrong. He's not asking for your blessing or approval. Just wanted you to be aware. Let me know if you want to talk. I read the email 3 times. Then I called Marcus. Tell me more, I said. The book is called The Unmaking of a Leader, Marcus explained. It's basically his memoir, his rise, his fall, and his attempt at redemption. I got an advance copy. It's surprisingly honest. He doesn't pull punches. He fully owns what he did to you and others. Does he try to justify it? No. He explains the mindset, the insecurity, the fear, but he doesn't excuse it. And he spends a lot of the book talking about how he's tried to change. I was quiet for a long moment. How do you feel about it? Marcus asked. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to ignore it completely. Another part of me is curious. Want me to send you the advance copy? I hesitated. Then, yeah. Send it. The book arrived 2 days later. I held it in my hands, staring at the cover. A simple design, David's name, the title, and a black and white photo of him looking contemplative. I made myself a cup of tea, curled up on my couch, and started reading. The first chapter was titled The Day I Destroyed My Career. It opened with the boardroom scene. I told her she was dumb. Useless. Not worth her salary. I said it loudly, publicly, and with the full weight of my authority behind me. And in that moment, I destroyed more than her confidence, I destroyed any claim I had to being a decent human being. I kept reading. David wrote about his childhood, growing up with a father who demanded perfection and punished failure with cruelty. He wrote about his early career, the constant fear of being exposed as not good enough, and the way he compensated by tearing others down. He wrote about the moment he realized what he'd become. I was sitting in my apartment, alone, jobless, and drowning in regret, when I finally understood. I hadn't built an empire. I'd built a prison. And I was both the warden and the inmate. He wrote about reaching out to the people he'd hurt. The apologies. The rejections. The slow, painful process of acknowledging that some things can't be fixed. And he wrote about me. Emma Hart was the best strategist I ever worked with. She was smart, innovative, and deeply committed to the company's success. And I repaid her dedication with humiliation. I told myself she was a threat. But the truth is, I was threatened by her competence, her confidence, and her ability to see solutions I couldn't. I wanted to diminish her so I could feel bigger. And in doing so, I proved exactly how small I really was. I closed the book, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of anger. Tears of closure. Because after 12 years, I finally understood. David's cruelty had never been about me. It had always been about him. His fear. His insecurity. His inability to see his own worth without comparing himself to others. And while that didn't excuse what he did, it helped me let go of the last thread of anger I'd been holding on to. I picked up my phone and texted Marcus. I read it. Tell David. I appreciate his honesty. Marcus replied immediately, will do. You okay? Yeah. I really am. The book was published a month later. It received mixed reviews. Some praised David's vulnerability and honesty. Others criticized him for profiting from his mistakes. And some questioned whether true redemption was even possible for someone who'd caused so much harm. I didn't weigh in publicly. But privately, I hoped the book would help someone. Maybe a young leader who recognized themselves in David's story and chose a different path. Maybe a victim of workplace abuse who found validation in seeing their experience acknowledged. Maybe even David himself, continuing the work of becoming better. Because that's what growth looks like. Not perfection. Not erasing the past. But showing up, doing the work, and hoping it makes a difference. 13 years after the boardroom incident, I stood on a stage in Geneva, addressing a United Nations summit on workplace ethics and human rights. The audience included government officials, corporate leaders, NGO representatives, and activists from around the world. We've spent decades building business models around profit maximization, I said, my voice carrying through the vast hall. And in doing so, we've normalized behaviors that are fundamentally inhumane. We've accepted that bosses can berate employees. That long hours equal dedication. That sacrificing mental health is the price of success. I paused, letting the words sink in. But what if we built differently? What if we measured success not just by revenue, but by employee well-being? Not just by market share, but by cultural impact? Not just by quarterly earnings, but by the legacy we leave behind? The audience was silent, hanging on every word. 13 years ago, I was a victim of toxic leadership. But I refused to let that define me. I chose to build something better. And today, I stand before you as proof that it's possible. That businesses can thrive while treating people with dignity. That profit and compassion are not opposites, they're partners. I shared case studies from Meridian and other companies that had embraced ethical leadership. I presented data showing that companies with strong cultures outperformed their competitors in innovation, retention, and long-term profitability. And I called for systemic change, regulations, policies, and frameworks that held leaders accountable for the environments they created. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. And afterward, dozens of people approached me, some wanting to collaborate, others simply wanting to share their own stories. One woman, a government minister from a small European nation, shook my hand firmly. "We're drafting legislation to protect workers from psychological abuse in the workplace," she said. "Your story has been instrumental in building public support." Thank you. I felt a surge of pride. This was bigger than me now. This was a movement. And I was honored to be part of it. 14 years after the boardroom incident, I sat in my office at Harvard, grading final papers, when I received an unexpected visitor. A knock on my door. "Come in," I called. The door opened, and a young woman stepped inside, mid-20s, nervous energy, eyes full of determination. "Professor Hart," she said. "I'm sorry to drop by without an appointment. My name is Rebecca. I just graduated, and I wanted to thank you before I left." I smiled. "Of course. Please, sit." She sat down, clutching her bag like a lifeline. "Your class changed my life," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I came to business school because my parents wanted me to. I thought I'd end up in finance or consulting, making money and hating every minute of it. But your class showed me that business can be a force for good. That leadership is about service, not power." I nodded, listening. "I'm starting a nonprofit," she continued. "It's focused on helping women transition out of toxic work environments and into roles where they're valued. I wouldn't have had the courage to do it if not for your story." Tears pricked my eyes. "That's extraordinary, Rebecca," I said. "What's the nonprofit called?" "Rise Collective," she said, smiling. "Because everyone deserves a chance to rise." I reached across the desk and squeezed her hand. "You're going to change so many lives," I said. "I believe in you." She left my office glowing with purpose. And I sat there, overwhelmed by the ripple effect of sharing my story. How one moment of pain had sparked a decade of growth. How one act of courage had inspired thousands. How choosing to rise had given others permission to do the same. 15 years after the boardroom incident, Meridian celebrated a major milestone. We'd been named the best place to work in the world by multiple organizations. Our employee retention rate was 98%. Our innovation output had tripled. And our revenue had grown by over 400% since I'd joined. But the metric I was most proud of? 0 reported cases of workplace harassment or abuse in 5 years. 0. Because we'd built a culture where that behavior wasn't just discouraged, it was unthinkable. At the celebration event, Marcus pulled me aside. "I need to tell you something," he said. "What's up?" "I'm stepping down as CEO." I stared at him, shocked. "What? Why?" He smiled. "Because it's time. I've been doing this for 20 years, Emma. I'm tired. I want to travel. Spend time with my family. Maybe write a book of my own. Who's going to replace you?" His smile widened. "Aisha. She's ready. And she's going to be incredible." I felt a swell of pride. "She is," I agreed. "She absolutely is." "You built this, Emma," Marcus said quietly. "Not just the company. The people. The culture. The legacy. This is your fingerprint on the world." I shook my head. "We built it together." "Maybe," he said. "But you were the spark." At Marcus's retirement party, I gave a speech honoring his contributions. But more than that, I honored the partnership we'd built. The trust. The respect. The shared commitment to building something that mattered. "Marcus believed in me when I had nothing to offer but anger and determination," I said. "He gave me a chance. And together, we proved that businesses can be both successful and humane." I raised my glass. To Marcus. To Aisha. And to everyone who's ever chosen to build instead of destroy. The room erupted in applause. And I felt, once again, the deep satisfaction of knowing I was exactly where I was supposed to be. 16 years after the boardroom incident, I received a letter. Not an email. A physical letter, handwritten on elegant stationery. The return address was unfamiliar. I opened it carefully. "Dear Emma, you don't know me, but my name is Catherine Harrington. I'm David's younger sister. I'm writing to tell you that David passed away last week. It was sudden, a heart attack. He was 56. I'm not writing to ask for condolences or sympathy. I'm writing because, in his final years, David talked about you often. He carried tremendous guilt for what he did to you. But he also carried tremendous gratitude. He said that you taught him the most important lesson of his life, that accountability is the foundation of redemption. In his will, David left a donation to your nonprofit initiatives focused on workplace reform. It's not much, $50,000, but he wanted it to go toward the work you're doing. He also left a note for you. I've enclosed it. Thank you for everything you did, both for the industry and, in a strange way, for my brother. He became a better man because of you. With respect, Catherine Harrington." My hands trembled as I unfolded the second piece of paper. David's handwriting, shaky but legible. "Emma, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And that's okay. I've made my peace with the life I lived and the mistakes I made. But I wanted you to know, one last time, that you were right. About everything. Leadership isn't about power. It's about service. Success isn't about dominance. It's about lifting others up. And redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning from it. Thank you for teaching me that." I hope the work you're doing continues to change lives. God knows, it changed mine. With gratitude and respect, David. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of grief, but tears of completion. The story that began 16 years ago in a boardroom had finally, truly ended. And in its place was something unexpected. Forgiveness. Not because David earned it, but because I chose it. Because holding on to anger, even justified anger, had only ever hurt me. And I was done hurting. I folded the letters carefully and placed them in a drawer. Then I sat at my desk and wrote a response to Catherine. Dear Catherine, thank you for reaching out. I'm sorry for your loss. Your brother and I had a complicated history, but I'm grateful he found peace in his final years. Please accept my condolences, and know that his donation will be put to meaningful use. With respect, Emma Hart. I mailed the letter that afternoon. And I felt, for the first time in 16 years, completely free. 17 years after the boardroom incident, I stood in front of a mirror in my apartment, getting ready for an awards ceremony. I'd been named Business Leader of the Year by an international organization focused on ethical leadership. The award came with a significant cash prize, which I'd already decided to donate to Rise Collective, Rebecca's nonprofit, which had grown exponentially and was now helping thousands of women worldwide. As I adjusted my dress, I thought about the journey. The pain. The growth. The unexpected turns. The people who'd believed in me. The people I'd helped along the way. And I realized I wouldn't change a single thing. Not the humiliation. Not the struggle. Not even the pain. Because all of it had led me here. To this moment. To this life. To this version of myself that I was genuinely proud of. My phone buzzed. A text from Aisha. Car's downstairs. Ready? I smiled. Ready. The ceremony was held in a grand hotel ballroom, packed with industry leaders, journalists, and activists. When my name was called, I walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. I accepted the award, a beautiful crystal sculpture, and stepped up to the microphone. 17 years ago, I walked out of a boardroom convinced my career was over. I was humiliated, broken, and certain I'd never recover. The room was silent. But here's what I learned, I continued. Rock bottom is a foundation. And if you choose to build on it, you can create something extraordinary. I looked out at the audience, faces full of hope, inspiration, and determination. This award isn't just for me, I said. It's for every person who's ever been told they're not good enough. Every person who's been torn down by someone who should have lifted them up. Every person who chose to rise anyway. I held up the award. This is for you, I said. For your courage. Your resilience. Your refusal to let someone else's cruelty define your worth. The applause was deafening. And as I walked off that stage, I felt a profound sense of peace. The story that began with humiliation had ended with triumph. Not because I'd destroyed the person who hurt me. But because I'd built something so beautiful, so meaningful, so powerful, that his words no longer mattered. I was enough. I'd always been enough. And nothing, no insult, no setback, no moment of cruelty, could ever take that away. That night, after the ceremony, I sat on my balcony one last time, looking out at the city lights. My phone was off. The world was quiet. And I was, finally, completely at peace. I thought about David, gone now, but at peace himself. I thought about Marcus, retired and happy. I thought about my team at Meridian, thriving under Aisha's leadership. I thought about my students, spreading out across the world, building better companies. I thought about Rebecca and the thousands of women her nonprofit had helped. And I thought about myself. The woman who'd been called dumb. Useless. Not worth her salary. The woman who'd walked out with nothing but wounded pride and burning determination. The woman who'd built an empire. Not of money or power, but of purpose. Of meaning. Of impact. I pulled out my journal, the same one I'd been keeping for 17 years, and wrote one final entry. To anyone reading this someday, if you're in a dark place right now, know this: you will rise. It might take time. It might take more strength than you think you have. But you will rise. And when you do, you'll realize something beautiful: the people who tried to break you were only revealing their own brokenness. Your worth was never in question. You just had to remember it. So rise. Build. Create. And never, ever let anyone convince you that you're not enough. Because you are. You always have been. And you always will be. With love and respect, Emma. I closed the journal, set it on the table, and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, someone was sitting in a boardroom, being told they weren't good enough. And I hoped, desperately hoped, that they'd remember. That this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Because every ending is just a new story waiting to be written. And every fall is just an opportunity to rise higher than you ever thought possible. I smiled, took a deep breath, and whispered into the night, I rose. And I meant it with every fiber of my being. The end.